Have a cumbersome cold that I'm trying to shake, hence the mask, and a cumbersome talus I'm trying to keep on my shoulders. I'm going to focus on the talus this morning for a few minutes. Michael, it was remarkable. I didn't know that you would have that talus on today. Tell me again the history of the talus. Wolf Atkins, so he was your great-grandfather, so Remy's great-great-grandfather. It definitely looks like a talus that has some history to it, right? But it's an astonishing thing to put a talus like that on, and you feel that sense of the presence of the generations. That's an old-school talus, right? It's an old-school talus, but the talus today has, in many ways, become an art form. I mean, beautiful talisim that are sold for men and women alike. I mean, all these gorgeous designs and fabulous colors and different kinds of fabrics as well. You can just look around the sanctuary today and see a wide variety. My first talus was bought for me by Pearl, my Uncle Marvin, in 1977, in the spring of 1977, which was arguably the greatest period of all time for the Grateful Dead, which I didn't know at the time. My Uncle Marvin bought me that talus. It was a few months before my bar mitzvah. And some of you know I grew up in the Reform movement. And those of you who are familiar with Reform Judaism and think back to the mid-late 70s and the Reform movement, it was very unusual, highly unusual, actually, at the time, for someone to wear a talus in services in a Reformed congregation. But my Uncle Marvin knew my bar mitzvah was coming up. He was absolutely determined that I should have a talus at my bar mitzvah. He bought me the talus here in Baltimore. There was a Judaic store, long gone. It was somewhere down Reisterstown Road. And when I was called to the Torah as a bar mitzvah, I was wearing that talus. I still have it at home. We actually had to ask the rabbi's permission for me to wear the talus. We had to ask will it be okay for Steve to wear a talus at his bar mitzvah? And the rabbi agreed. I mean, that shows you how things change over time. At the time, going back all those years, I was happy to wear that talus because even all the way back then, I was much more interested in Judaism than my other Hebrew school classmates. But I didn't understand the significance of it at all. I really had no idea how important the talus is in the chain of Jewish tradition and how old the custom of wearing a talus is in Judaism. I began to get a sense of those things, when Becky's father took me to the famed Israel Bookshop, which is on Harvard Street in Boston. Those of you who are familiar with Boston would know that. This was a few months before Becky and I were married. In traditional Jewish life, the father of the bride buys the groom a talus. The father of the bride traditionally buys the groom a talus. I'll come back to that in a moment. That day when Becky's dad, Mike, took me to that bookshop, I picked out a talus really only because I liked the looks of it. You know, sort of like how my mom used to buy bottles of wine. She liked the look of the label. That's how she chose the bottle of wine. This is that talus. This is that talus. And I wore it 36 years ago when I was called to the Torah, when Becky and I had our ufruf, a couple days before our wedding. That day in Boston, when Mike bought me that talus, I was 25 years old. I knew very little about Judaism, very little about Jewish traditions. So I had no idea that this talus was patterned after the famous Ketonat HaPasim, the coat of many colors that Joseph is given by Jacob in Parshat Vayeshev in the book of Genesis, which we'll start reading again in just a few weeks at this point. The Torah there, that text in Genesis with the Joseph story, doesn't say what the colors were, never specifies what any of the colors were, but the sense over the years has been that Joseph's garment was indeed multicolored. In fact, Rashi, who is the great medieval biblical commentator, describes Joseph's tunic by using a verse that comes from the book of Esther, and it's a verse that describes a wall hanging in the palace in Esther, and the colors of the wall hanging, white and blue and purple and silver and alabaster and all these colors. So Rashi's inferring that the tallis, or the garment that was given to Joseph, had all of those colors in it. And of course, the tallis is referred to throughout the Torah in multiple places. It's referred to in Numbers 15, which is the maftir reading for Parshat Shelach Lecha. That's been chosen by the sages, and we now also recite that every single day as the third paragraph of the Shema. The tallis is referred to in this morning's Torah portion as well. Ki teitzeh, where it says, Gidilim te'aselach, that you will make for yourselves gidilim, fringes, what we call the tzitzit, in the four corners of your garments, referred to in other places of the Torah as well. And it's something in the references in the Torah, since there are so many, and since the Torah doesn't give us much information about them, it seems to me it's assumed knowledge. In other words, those who were writing the Torah expected those who were hearing it or reading the Torah to know already what it was. They didn't have to say that much about it. And that tells me that the tallis is probably one of the oldest continually maintained traditions in Jewish life. One of the oldest. I had to guess, I would say that Jews have been wearing a tallis of one kind or another probably for some 3,000 years, maybe longer than that. Archaeologists have long known that social status in ancient times was symbolized by clothing, and particularly, and of interest to us sitting here today wearing taliyot, particularly of interest to us, the fringes of a person's garment in ancient times, archaeologists have learned, were significant. The length of the fringes, the color, the complexity of the knots in the fringes was continued to be significant. It could signify a job. It could signify how important a person was. It could signify what social class they were a member of, by the fringes. And people often used, since they were not literate, the fringe of their garment to sign a document in clay. You would take the fringe of the garment and print it in clay, and that actually became your signature. We also know that people who were important in the ancient world, in their fringe, to symbolize royalty or wealth, had a particular color. And guess what the color was in their fringe? It was blue. I thought maybe you would say purple, since the Ravens play their first game tomorrow night. But it was blue. That's the way the fringe is described in the Torah, blue, the color of royalty. So given that the fringes on our garments, the talises, are complicated with all of the knots and the wrappings, and given that traditionally they had a fringe of blue in them, the color of royalty, given all of those things, in Judaism, what happened was the sense of the tallis originally was royalty, but then it was democratized so that every person who's in the sanctuary this morning has the ability to wear a tallis. You don't have to be wealthy. You don't have to be a member of the ruling class. You don't have to be a priest. You don't even have to be a learned person. Every Jew, if you want, can wear a coat of many colors, so to speak. And that's because in the eyes of God, we are all equal, none of us greater than any other, all human beings, equal worth, equal dignity, all privileged to wear the garment of a king or a queen. The Talmud then takes this one step further and explains that the tallis is also a symbol of the garments worn by the high priest in ancient times, in ancient Israel. So when we wear our taliyot today, we in essence become not only like the kings and queens from the royal fringe, the blue fringe, but also we become like the high priest of antiquity with all of the elaborate robes that he would wear and the fringes and the blue and purple threads. And remember that in the book of Exodus, and this is in Exodus 19, it's just before the giving of the Ten Commandments, where it says, Vatem tiyuli Kohanim v'goy kadosh, that you Jews, or in that case Israelites, you should be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So when we put on the tallis, we symbolize both royalty on the one hand, the priesthood on the other, and we remind ourselves of what, in those two ways, of what we are called to in terms of living a Jewish life, how we're supposed to live a Jewish life. I told you a few moments ago my first tallis was given to me by my Uncle Marvin. That was 48 years ago. I wore that tallis on my bar mitzvah. It's not in great shape. In fact, in worse shape than the tallis that Michael has on today. There's a lot of holes in it. Becky's father gave me that second tallis. That was 36 years ago, and I'm still wearing it today, as I told you. And now it's my turn. Now it becomes my turn. There are 3 taliyot that I'm interested, very much looking forward to buying in the months and the years that are ahead. I'll be blessed by the end of 2026 to have 3 sons-in-law, and to go back to that tradition of buying your son-in-law a tallis. When my Talia married Austin, I bought Austin a tallis. When he's here on Yontif, he wears that tallis. Meirav and Josh are both engaged now, my son and daughter. So 2 more sons-in-law coming, and in the months ahead, I'll take their fiancés, Ravi and Sam, out tallis shopping, something that Sam actually will very much enjoy. Buying them taliyot that I hope they'll wear in good health for many, many years. Most astonishing to me, I became a Zaidi a little over a week ago, just a little over a week ago. So in 13 years, you're all invited to the bar mitzvah, okay? Tali and Austin's son, Rami, had his bris in New York City on Wednesday. But you know, most of you know, almost all of you know, how quickly 13 years can go by. It can be like the blink of an eye. You sit here at a bat mitzvah today, knowing that for sure. And the truth is, it won't be too long, I hope, before I have the privilege of shopping for a tallis for my grandson, What a moment that will be. For me, the chance one day to give little Rami a sacred garment that will anchor him in the Jewish past while also opening doors wide for the Jewish future. And for Rami, 13 years from now, the opportunity and the responsibility, by the way, as well, of being the next link in the ancient chain of Jewish tradition, the tradition of our people, Am Yisrael. I'd like to give you one last story about the tallis, a quick one, but a famous one. On the 29th day of August, the year 1897, so that's almost exactly 128 years ago, the very first Zionist Congress was set to open in Basel, Switzerland. Just a couple of hours before the first session of that first Zionist Congress, Theodor Herzl asked his right-hand man, whose name was David Wolfson, to create a banner or a flag, some kind of symbol for the hall that would host the first Zionist Congress, something that would symbolize the Jewish people and the history of the Jewish people and what the Zionist Congress was assembling to talk about. It was a momentous day, a historic day. The delegates would soon be walking into the hall. And the story goes that Wolfson ran through the streets of Basel, and he's looking at garment shops and thinking flag shops. What could he possibly bring? What would be suitable? I mean, he can't find a single thing, not one thing. And he's completely defeated, and he's absolutely exhausted. And he decides he's just going to sit down for a few minutes before he goes back to tell Herzl he just doesn't have anything, they'll have to do without it. And he happens to be by a shul, so he walks into the shul to sit down and just take a load off his feet for a few minutes. And he walks into the opening of the shul, like right out there, and what's there? There's a rack, and the rack has on it tallises. And he grabs one of the tallises. It was one of those tallises that has the blue stripes down the side, and he found a blue pen. And he drew out a large Magen David, a Star of David, the center of the tallis, and he returned it to the hall, and he hung it there, and it was hanging there for the first Zionist Congress in 1897. And in that moment, the tallis, which was, again, so ancient, going back at least 3,000 years, already a symbol of royalty, already a symbol a priesthood, already a symbol of the responsibility of every Jew to live Jewishly in their lives each and every day. Already a symbol of all of that. At that moment, it became a symbol of the modern state of Israel, founded in 1948. Symbol that connects us still today to one another, to our children and our grandchildren, right, Eddie? To our friends, to the people Israel, to God, to Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel, and Lador Vador, from one generation to the next. Shabbat Shalom.